Lieutenant Elena Rodriguez slipped into the dimly lit bar just off base, her weathered hands still bearing the calluses from her latest deployment. 3 weeks in hostile territory had left her craving nothing more than a quiet drink and the comforting background noise of civilian life. The Anchor Down was a popular spot for military personnel, mostly Marines from the nearby base. But tonight she'd hoped to blend in. Just another face in the crowd. Elena had made history as one of the first women to complete SEAL training, though she never mentioned it. Her father had served with Lieutenant Audie Murphy, and that legacy of quiet strength ran in her blood. At 32, she carried herself with the confident economy of movement that marked special operators. Nothing wasted, everything purposeful. She chose a corner booth, back to the wall, eyes on the door, habits that had kept her alive during 3 tours. The bartender nodded in recognition as she ordered a whiskey neat. He was ex-Navy himself and respected her privacy, one of the reasons she frequented this place when stateside. The mission she just returned from remained classified. Extraction of high-value intelligence assets from a region where American forces officially had no presence. Her team had succeeded, but not without cost. The fresh scar along her forearm told part of that story, though she kept it covered with her jacket sleeve. As Elena sipped her drink, the door swung open and 6 Marines entered, already half drunk and rowdy. She recognized their type immediately. Young, cocky, with something to prove. Their leader, a sergeant with a high-end tight and too many muscles, scanned the room like he owned it. His eyes landed on Elena, narrowed, then widened in recognition. "Well, look what we have here," he announced loud enough for his buddies to hear. "Isn't that the poster girl for the new inclusive military?" Elena took another sip, ignoring them. She'd faced worse than drunk Marines with fragile egos. But tonight, she was tired. The wound in her side from the extraction was still healing, and the faces of the 2 civilians they couldn't save still haunted her. The Marines made their way to the bar, ordering beers and shooting glances her way. Their conversation grew louder, more pointed. Comments about women in combat roles, about lowered standards, about publicity stunts. In the corner, an older woman sat nursing a genonic. Few would recognize Colonel Harrison out of uniform, the first black female U-2 pilot who'd later helped design special operations training protocols. But Elena knew her immediately. Harrison had been a guest instructor during Elena's SEAL qualification training, pushing her harder than any of the men. The colonel caught Elena's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement between warriors. The Marines were getting bolder now, their sergeant leading them toward Elena's booth. She calculated her options: de-escalate, leave, or stand her ground. The weight of her concealed sidearm pressed against her ankle. A last resort she'd never consider using here. "No one's saving you now, SEAL girl," the sergeant sneered as they surrounded her table. "Let's see what you're made of without your PR team around." Elena set down her glass slowly. She'd been trained by the best. Lieutenant Marcus Thompson's combat techniques, Colonel Eileen Collins' leadership principles. She'd survived firefights in 3 countries and extracted hostages under heavy fire just 72 hours ago. These Marines had no idea who they were challenging. And as they closed in around her booth, blocking all exits, Elena realized this night wasn't going to end quietly after all. The sergeant planted his palms on Elena's table, leaning in until she could smell the whiskey on his breath. His 5 companions formed a tight semicircle, effectively cutting off any easy exit. The bar had grown quieter, other patrons sensing the brewing confrontation. "Heard you SEALs think you're better than Marines now," the sergeant said, his voice carrying, "especially the token females they're letting in." Elena remained seated, her posture relaxed but alert. "I'm just here for a drink, Sergeant. Not looking for trouble. Too bad trouble found you." He knocked her glass over, whiskey spilling across the table. "Show us what they taught you in that watered-down training program." Elena's mind flashed to the ridge in North Africa 3 days ago, pinned down by enemy fire, her team leader bleeding out beside her, comms jammed. That was trouble. This was just wounded pride in uniform. "Last chance to walk away," she said quietly, making eye contact with each Marine. 2 looked uncertain, but the others were committed now, audience watching. The sergeant reached for her collar. "No one's saving you now." His wrist never made contact. Elena's movement was fluid, almost casual, a technique Lieutenant Marcus Thompson had perfected for close-quarters neutralization. The sergeant's arm was suddenly twisted behind him, his face pressed against the table where her drink had been. "Stand down," she advised the others. They didn't. Two lunged forward together. A mistake. Elena pivoted, using the sergeant's body as a counterweight to kick one Marine back into the second. Both stumbled into a nearby table, sending glasses crashing. The fourth Marine, taller and more disciplined, circled to her blind side. Elena released the sergeant with a push that sent him sprawling and turned to face the new threat. This one had training. His stance suggested boxing, maybe army combatives. He threw a tight hook that would have connected if Elena hadn't already dropped below it, sweeping his legs. As he fell, the fifth Marine grabbed her from behind, arms locking around her torso, pressing painfully against her still-healing wound. Elena felt the stitches tear, warm blood seeping through her shirt. The pain sharpened her focus. She drove her heel down onto his instep, then snapped her head back into his nose. His grip loosened enough for her to break free, but the exertion had cost her. The sixth Marine, who'd been hesitating, now moved in with the others. Elena found herself surrounded again, blood staining her side, outnumbered and injured. The sergeant had regained his feet, rage replacing his earlier arrogance. "You're dead," he spat, reaching behind his back. Elena saw the glint of a knife. Not standard issue, a personal blade. The situation had escalated beyond posturing. In the corner of her eye, she noticed Colonel Harrison's standing hand inside her jacket. Time slowed as Elena accessed a combat mindset that had kept her alive in Kandahar when her extraction team was ambushed. She centered herself, remembering Colonel James Carter's words during medical training. "Pain is information, not an obstacle." The Marines closed in, the sergeant's knife low and ready. Elena's options narrowed. Disable them quickly or risk serious injury. She couldn't reach her ankle holster, and using a firearm in a crowded bar was unthinkable. "Anyway, you should know," Elena said, her voice steady despite the blood now soaking her shirt. "I wasn't trained as a Navy SEAL because I'm a woman." The sergeant lunged with a knife. "I was trained as a Navy SEAL because I was already a warrior." What happened next occurred so rapidly that witnesses would later disagree on the sequence. Elena moved with a precision that made Lieutenant Marcus Thompson legendary. Economy of motion, devastating effect. The knife clattered to the floor as the sergeant's wrist snapped. Two more Marines went down in rapid succession. Joint locks applied with surgical accuracy. The remaining three hesitated, suddenly uncertain, as they realized they were facing something far beyond what they had anticipated. The bar fell silent as Elena stood amid the 6 incapacitated Marines. The sergeant clutched his broken wrist, face contorted with pain and humiliation. Two others lay groaning on the floor, one nursing a dislocated shoulder, another struggling to breathe after a precisely placed strike to his solar plexus. The remaining three were immobilized in various submission holds that Elena had released once they stopped struggling. Blood seeped through Elena's shirt where her wound had reopened, but she remained standing, her breathing controlled and steady. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 40 seconds. Colonel Harrison approached, her hand no longer inside her jacket. "At ease, Lieutenant," she said, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of command. "I believe these men have learned their lesson." The bartender, a Vietnam veteran who'd served alongside Lieutenant John F. Kennedy's unit, had already called the military police. "They'll be here in 5, he announced, tossing Elena a clean bar towel for her bleeding side. The sergeant, still on his knees, glared up at Elena. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Actually, it is," came a new voice from the doorway. A Marine colonel stood there, his uniform immaculate, ribbons indicating multiple combat tours. "On your feet, all of you." The Marines struggled to attention, even the injured ones. The colonel walked slowly around the scene, taking in the overturned furniture, the knife on the floor, and Elena's bloodstained shirt. "Sir," the sergeant began, "we were just—" "Save it, Sergeant Miller." The colonel cut him off. "I received a call from Colonel Harrison here. She thought I might want to know that 6 of my Marines were about to assault the woman who rescued me and 15 other hostages from a terrorist compound 3 days ago." The Marines' faces drained of color as they looked back at Elena with new understanding. Lieutenant Rodriguez led the SEAL team that extracted us after our convoy was ambushed. She personally eliminated 4 enemy combatants while carrying our wounded intelligence officer to the extraction point. The mission remains classified, which is why you won't find it in any report or news story. Elena stood straighter despite her injury. Sir, that information is necessary context, Lieutenant. The colonel interrupted. These men should understand exactly who they were threatening. The military police arrived, quickly assessing the situation. The colonel instructed them to escort their Marines back to base for disciplinary action. As they were let out, the sergeant paused beside Elena. He struggled with the words, "I was wrong about everything." Elena met his eyes. "We all serve the same flag, Sergeant. Remember that next time." After the MPs departed with the Marines, Colonel Harrison insisted on examining Elena's wound. "You tore your stitches. The medic on your team would be disappointed." "Chief Ramirez has patched me up worse," Elena replied with a slight smile. The bar patrons, mostly veterans themselves, had watched the entire scene unfold. One by one, they approached Elena, offering quiet words of respect or simply a nod of acknowledgement. No grand speeches or dramatic salutes, just a simple recognition between those who understood the true weight of service and sacrifice. Later that night, as a Navy corpsman re-stitched her wound at the base medical facility, Elena received a message. The Marine colonel had recommended her for a commendation and more surprisingly requested that she conduct joint training sessions with his unit on close-quarters combat techniques. "They could learn from you," his message read, not as a female SEAL, but as a superior warrior. 6 months later, Elena stood before a mixed group of Marines and Navy personnel, including the sergeant with a now-healed wrist. They watched attentively as she demonstrated the techniques that had saved her life multiple times in combat zones across the world. The enemy doesn't care about your gender, your background, or your feelings. Neither does death. The only thing that matters in combat is whether you've prepared yourself to be the most effective warrior possible. The sergeant, now her most dedicated student, nodded in understanding. The bar incident had faded into base legend, but its impact remained not as a story about a woman proving herself, but as a reminder that true warriors recognize and respect each other beyond the superficial. As Elena watched her students pair off for practice, Colonel Harrison joined her at the edge of the training floor. "You've changed them," the colonel observed. I shook my head. "They changed themselves. I just showed them the way." That, Colonel Harrison said with a knowing smile, is what real leadership looks like. 3 months after the training program concluded, Elena received new orders that would test everything she'd learned about leadership and proving herself in an unforgiving military hierarchy. Operation Desert Viper called for the extraction of a captured CIA operative from a heavily fortified compound in Syria. The mission parameters were classified at the highest levels, and the Joint Task Force included elements from multiple special operations units. Elena was assigned as the medical officer and secondary assault team leader, a role that placed her directly in the chain of command for the first time since the bar incident had elevated her reputation throughout the special operations community. The briefing took place in a sterile conference room at Naval Special Warfare Command, where Elena found herself seated among 12 of the most experienced operators in the military. Master Chief Petty Officer Antonio Silva, a 20-year SEAL veteran with 4 Bronze Stars, led the tactical planning. Colonel David Brennan from the Army's Delta Force provided intelligence oversight, while Commander Jake Morrison coordinated naval support elements. The target compound sat in hostile territory, surrounded by Syrian government forces and Russian military advisors. Intelligence indicated the prisoner, CIA operative Dr. Rebecca Chun, possessed critical information about Russian military operations in the region. Her extraction was deemed essential to national security interests. Elena studied the satellite imagery as Silva outlined the approach vectors. The compound featured multiple defensive positions, underground tunnels, and an estimated 40 enemy combatants. Standard extraction protocols called for overwhelming force and rapid exfiltration, but the political sensitivity of the mission required surgical precision. "We go in quiet," Silver explained, his weathered face reflecting years of similar operations. Primary assault team takes the main building while secondary team, led by Lieutenant Rodriguez, secures the extraction route and provides medical support. Elena felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. The other operators watched her carefully, some with the respect she'd earned, others still evaluating whether she belonged in this room. She'd proven herself in individual combat, but leading a team in hostile territory represented an entirely different challenge. The mission launched at 0300 hours from a forward operating base in Jordan. 2 Black Hawk helicopters carried the assault teams across the Syrian border, flying low to avoid radar detection. Elena's team consisted of 6 operators: Petty Officer First Class Miguel Santos, a demolitions expert; Hospital Corpsman First Class Jennifer Park, her medical backup; and 4 Marines from Force Reconnaissance, including Sergeant Williams, who had specifically requested assignment to her team after hearing about the training sessions. As they approached the target, Elena reviewed the mission timeline in her mind. Primary assault team would fast rope onto the compound roof, while her team secured the perimeter and established overwatch positions. Once Dr. Chun was located, Elena would provide medical assessment and prepare her for extraction. The margin for error was essentially 0. The helicopters flared over the target site, and Elena's team rappelled into a landscape of desert scrub and concrete barriers. The compound loomed ahead, its walls topped with razor wire and punctuated by guard towers. Elena signaled her team into position, watching as Silva's assault team disappeared over the main building's rooftop. For the first 90 seconds, everything proceeded according to plan. Elena's team reached their overwatch positions without detection, and the primary assault commenced with coordinated breaches of the main building. Then the mission parameters changed drastically when a Russian patrol, undetected by intelligence gathering, arrived at the compound's main gate. Elena watched through her night vision scope as 3 armored vehicles disgorged 12 Spetsnaz operators, elite Russian special forces who immediately began coordinating with the Syrian defenders. The tactical situation had shifted from a straightforward extraction to a potential international incident. Silva's voice crackled through the radio with controlled urgency. "Secondary team, we have company. Russian special forces on site. Primary assault is compromised." Elena's mind raced through contingency options. The original extraction plan called for helicopter pickup from the compound courtyard, but Russian anti-aircraft weapons made that approach suicidal. Alternative exfiltration routes led through 2 miles of hostile territory to a secondary pickup zone, but Dr. Chin's condition remained unknown. "Rodriguez, this is Silva. We've located the package, but she's in bad shape. Unconscious, possible head trauma, multiple injuries. We need immediate medical assessment." Elena made a decision that would define her career and potentially save or doom the entire mission. "Santos, take Williams and establish suppressive fire on the Russian positions. Park, you're with me. We're going into that compound." The sprint across open ground under enemy fire tested every aspect of Elena's training and mental preparation. Bullets snapped past her head as she zigzagged between concrete barriers, Park following closely behind. The compound's walls provided temporary cover, but Russian forces were already repositioning to surround the building. Elena reached the breach point where Silva's team had entered, finding the primary assault team pinned down by heavy machine gun fire. Dr. Chin lay unconscious in the building's basement, her face bearing evidence of systematic torture and her body showing signs of severe dehydration and malnutrition. Elena's medical assessment revealed a concussion, 3 broken ribs, and internal bleeding that required immediate surgical intervention. The extraction timeline had just accelerated dramatically. Silva appeared beside her, his face grim with tactical reality. "Russians have us surrounded. Helicopters can't land with those anti-aircraft systems active. We need to move to the secondary extraction point, but it's 2 miles through hostile territory." Elena looked at Dr. Chin's battered form, calculating medical priorities against tactical necessities. "She's stable enough to move, but barely. Internal bleeding means we have maybe 30 minutes before she goes into shock. I can keep her alive during movement, but extraction needs to happen fast." The team prepared for the most dangerous phase of the operation, movement through enemy territory while protecting a critically injured prisoner. Elena administered pain medication and fluids while Park prepared a makeshift stretcher from equipment packs. Silva coordinated with the remaining operators to establish a fighting withdrawal toward the extraction zone. The movement began with covering fire that lit up the Syrian night sky. Elena's team provided rear-guard security, while Silva's operators carried Dr. Chin through a landscape of rocky outcroppings and abandoned buildings. Russian forces pursued aggressively, their night vision equipment and superior numbers creating constant pressure on the extraction team. 20 minutes into the movement, Dr. Chun went into shock. Elena called for a halt in the ruins of an abandoned school, using her medical kit to establish and foreline and administer emergency medications. Russian voices echoed from nearby buildings as the pursuit closed distance. "We can't stop here," Silva warned, monitoring enemy positions through his scope. "They'll have us surrounded in 5 minutes." Elena worked frantically to stabilize her patient while bullets shattered concrete around their position. Park provided security while Elena performed emergency field surgery to control internal bleeding, her hands steady despite the chaos surrounding their temporary medical station. Dr. Chin's vital signs improved enough to continue movement, but Elena knew they were racing against physiological limits that no amount of training could overcome. The final assault on the extraction zone required everything Elena had learned about combat leadership and medical priorities under fire. Russian forces had positioned themselves between the SEAL team and their pickup point, forcing a direct confrontation that would determine mission success or catastrophic failure. Elena coordinated her team's advance while simultaneously monitoring Dr. Chin's deteriorating condition, making life or death decisions every few seconds. The firefight lasted 8 minutes and resulted in the successful extraction of Dr. Chin, though not without cost. Santos sustained shrapnel wounds that required immediate treatment, and Williams took a bullet through his shoulder that severed an artery. Elena found herself treating multiple casualties while coordinating defensive positions and calling for emergency medical evacuation. The helicopters arrived as Elena finished emergency surgery on Williams, her hands covered in blood, but her patient stable. Dr. Chun regained consciousness during the flight back to base, her first words expressing gratitude to the female SEAL who had risked everything to save her life. The mission debrief revealed that Dr. Chin's intelligence prevented a major terrorist attack on American civilians, information that would have been lost if the extraction had failed. Elena's performance under fire earned her a Navy Cross and promotion to lieutenant commander, but more importantly, it established her reputation as a leader who could handle the most challenging special operations missions. 6 months after Operation Desert Viper, Elena stood in the Pentagon briefing room as Admiral Patricia Hayes outlined her next assignment: command of a new joint task force focused on high-risk extraction operations in denied territory. The unit would include operators from all special operations communities, with Elena serving as the first female commander of such an organization. The bar incident that had started her journey toward proving herself now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the reality of leading America's most elite warriors in missions that would determine the outcome of global conflicts. As Elena reviewed personnel files for her new command, she reflected on the path that had brought her from a corner booth in a military bar to the highest levels of special operations leadership. The men who had challenged her that night had unknowingly set in motion a series of events that would redefine what it meant to be a warrior in the modern military. Colonel Harrison visited Elena's new office during her first week in command, bringing a bottle of whiskey to commemorate the occasion. They sat in comfortable silence, two warriors who had fought their battles in different eras but understood the weight of leadership and sacrifice. "You've changed the entire special operations community," Harrison observed, raising her glass in a toast. "Not by demanding respect, but by earning it through actions that speak louder than any words ever could." Elena smiled, thinking of the young Marines and sailors who would follow in her footsteps, facing challenges she could barely imagine, but carrying forward the legacy of warriors who proved themselves through dedication, skill, and unwavering commitment to their mission and their teammates. "The enemy doesn't care about your gender, your background, or your feelings," Elena had told her students. "Neither does death. The only thing that matters is whether you've prepared yourself to be the most effective warrior possible." Those words had become the unofficial motto of her command, printed on a plaque that hung above her desk as a reminder that true leadership transcends all artificial boundaries and focuses solely on the mission and the people who depend on you to bring them home alive. Years later, when military historians wrote about the integration of women into special operations forces, they would cite Elena Rodriguez as the turning point, the moment when gender became irrelevant and only performance mattered. But Elena knew the real story was simpler. She had simply done her job, day after day, mission after mission, until respect became inevitable and leadership became natural. The bar fight that started it all had faded into legend, but its lesson remained clear. Warriors recognize and respect each other not for who they are, but for what they do when everything is on the line and only competence matters.